now there still is one seat right next to me. The Smart Kids section. Okay, and Barbara will read the steps.
Thank you. My name is Barbara, and I am definitely an alcoholic. These are the steps. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 8, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. 6, were entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. 7, humbly asked Him to remove our shortcomings. 8, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make direct amends to them all. 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. 10, continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. 12, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs.
Thanks, Barbara.
Thanks, Barbara. And next, it says, oh no, forgive me. If you could please silence your cell phones at this time. Also, we ask if you could please refrain from getting up and down during the speakers. But if you must, please do so quietly. And if you're going to smoke, we ask you to be away from the buildings. Please be respectful as we are guests of the church. What else do I say?
Pick up butts.
Thank you. Anonymously pick up that butt. Okay. Also, if you have any announcements in between speakers, please see our group secretary. Group secretary, please raise your hand. Mr. Matt. Our first speaker tonight is Eli from Oldsmar.
I'm Eli Malcolm. I'm an alcoholic. And due to the grace of God and the program of Alcoholics Anonymous outlined in the book Alcoholics Anonymous, and a lot of really, really gentle, loving people, and the grace of God, I really don't understand. I've been continuously sober since Christmas Eve of 2007, and for that I'm grateful, and so are a lot of people who know me. Let's see, I love Ruthie's talk, so I'm not going to talk for very long, but real shortly, you don't get to Alcoholics Anonymous as young as I did, like without really doing some really terrible drinking. But just like real briefly, like my first drink was half a bottle of Sky Blue vodka. And the reason I say that is I had watched my parents. My mom's the kind of person that if you come to my house, you will get fed and you will get loved, and that's just the kind of family I come from. I don't come from a dysfunctional, alcoholic, I'm scared of mom and dad family. My parents are the best parents I could ever ask for, and probably considerably better than I deserve. But my mom always entertained, and so I wanted to see what alcohol was like. So right around the age of 14 or so, I went into the liquor cabinet and took the top off the bottle and drank until I couldn't breathe from the burning of the vodka, and went back to my room and watched the fan spin in the opposite direction of the room, which convinced me that I had not drank enough because I don't remember them talking about that. So I went back and drank half the bottle. And Mommy came home and asked me to wash my dad's car, and I kept missing the hose nozzle. I just couldn't seem to grab it. And she was like, "What's the matter with you?" And I was like, "Nothing," So I failed at that task, and she told me to go home and go in my bedroom and sleep it off, and I did. You know, it wasn't terribly dramatic. It wasn't the most exciting thing in the whole wide world, but I got to tell you, it fundamentally changed my life. Because I've always felt, especially around people, less than. No matter what I seem to do, and I've been gifted and I'm relatively talented at sports, and I'm fairly intelligent in school and things like that, and it seemed to me that no matter what I did, I was never good enough. And I knew that by the look that you gave me, that I just did not measure up, you know, no matter what I did. And that drink took that away. And so I continued to do that. And when you're like 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, you don't just go to the liquor store and pick up a pint. So I did things like drink, you know, Listerine and peppermint extract and things like that to consistently stay drunk, you know. And you know, it took me 6 months of sobriety to learn to brush my teeth because of that, because I just always smelled like mint, you know, and I was like, why do I need to do that? You know, I always smell good. But, you know, that's kind of what my drinking did, you know, and like I said, I have wonderful parents. They, you know, they do very well for themselves, and I would leave that nice house and that loving atmosphere, and I would go to places, you know, seeking out sordid spots, as it talks about in the big book. And I'd go to these places, and I'd sit with people who really I would not bring home to my mother, you know, and just a lot of my time drinking was spent, you know, in this house that didn't have any carpet and had, you know, sheets over the windows, and I would sit on my case of beer and I would just drink, and that's all I really did, you know, and in the process of that I caught 2 DUIs. You know, one of them I actually hit another drunk driver who had passed out at a green light. To give you an idea of my mind state during all of this drinking, I failed ethics twice in college. I don't know if you realize what that means, but if you fail ethics twice, you don't have the greatest moral compass. And that's kind of what my drinking did, you know. It was the great fact of my life that alcohol did for me what I couldn't do for myself, because I wasn't afraid of you anymore. You know, I didn't have to worry about changing who I was or what my stories were in front of you so that you would think I was okay, you know. And I absolutely loved that, you know, because I'm naturally terrified of people, so this is a terrifying thing for me right here. And when I drink, that goes away, you know. When I drink, I know how to make small talk and things like that. Otherwise, I just kind of stand there and smile and go, yeah. Because I just have no idea what to say, you know. And Alcoholics Anonymous has taken that away. But alcohol did first, you know, and that's kind of how I got here. But, you know, real briefly, Christmas Eve of 2007, I was 2 days after I had caught my second DUI, and I had been bailed out, and I was kicked out of my house, and I had a wonderfully codependent girlfriend at the time who brought me to her aunt's house because nobody wanted me, and her whole family was giving me that look like, you've ruined our daughter's life, you've ruined everything, you're a drain on this family, why are you here, kind of look, really justifying every way that I felt about myself, you know, and there was a guy there who had 12 years sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. And he had with him a guy who had 1 year sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. And he came up to me and said, I heard you got another DUI. And he's smiling. And I'm like, because I'm like shaking at this point in time and pretty pissed off and feeling, because my natural reaction of fear is either I will get cocky or I will get angry, you know. And I'm afraid of what all these, you know, her family's looking at me and the way that they're judging me and all that kind of stuff, you know. And he just smiled. You got another DUI, didn't you? I'm like, yeah, I did, you know. And he's like, you want to go get a cup of coffee? And I was like, sure, you know, because I wanted to get out of there, you know. And I'm thinking we're going to go to a Starbucks because it's like there's one that's relatively nearby. And instead, he took me to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so I got a cup of coffee, and it was a room full of old timers, and they were all, you know, sitting around and they seen me and I'm young and you don't want to end up like I did, kid, and all that crap. And a lot of them said that exact line. And I tell you what, don't ever say that to somebody who's young in Alcoholics Anonymous, because you don't have to be old to die of this disease. But a lot of them did say that. And one of the guys told me a story about how he had burned his house down. And you don't want to end up like me, kid. You have the chance to stay sober. And, you know, in the back of my mind, I think, you know, what makes you think I ended up a sad sack like you? You know? That guy's my sponsor today. I didn't get up and get a white chip. I didn't get a big book. I didn't surrender in that meeting. You know, the guy handed me a big book and a white chip after the meeting who brought me, and he said, you know, at least it'll look good for the judge. Why don't you keep going for a little while? And so I did, you know, and I went and I shared at you people to try to get kicked out of Alcoholics Anonymous, because if you get kicked out of AA, you can drink, right? You know. And so I did that for a little while, and eventually I was sitting in a meeting and somebody shared about what this disease really is. And he explained what it was like when he wasn't drinking and what it like when he was, you know, and that feeling of boredom and just depression, and you don't want to do anything, and you know that the best thing that's going to happen to you is that journey to get the alcohol, because the alcohol is not even working anymore. And he talked about that, and he talked about the change that came over him once he started drinking, and how he wasn't afraid anymore, and how he didn't have to worry about what you thought, you know, and all that kind of stuff. And it was at that point that I really realized, yeah, you know, I do have this thing. And I'd tried quitting drinking before, and he talked about how every time he tried on his own, he wasn't able to do it. And I broke down, and I cried, and I did the, I'm an alcoholic, you know, and then I ran the hell out of that meeting because they saw me cry, and guys don't cry, right? But that was kind of how I got started in Alcoholics Anonymous. So if there's anybody here who's new, please understand, you don't have to love everybody here. You don't have to want to be like everybody here. But if you can relate to anything that somebody shares in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, you probably belong here. And stick around long enough to listen. You know, because I see a lot of people who don't. You know, I see a lot of people who come in and will look at everybody up here and the home group members in their clothes dressed up and all the little groups of people talking outside, and they'll go, no, I'm not like these people. You didn't drink the way that I did. You haven't been the places that I've been, and you haven't done the things that I've done, and I know that, you know. But I swear to you that's not true, because that's the same way I thought, and I damn near died getting in here, you know, and I don't ever want to go back. So I've been very involved in Alcoholics Anonymous since then. But I've talked long enough, and Ruthie's story is absolutely amazing. So thank you for my sobriety.
Thank you, Eli. Sean is going to come up and read the traditions. I don't know where they are. Where's the little thing? There's promises. Pages gotta be here. That's the long. There we go.
I'm Sean. I'm an alcoholic. These are the 12 traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous. Number 1, our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends on AA unity. 2, for our group purpose, there is but one ultimate authority, a loving God, as He may express Himself. In our group conscience, our leaders are but trusted servants, they do not govern. 3, the only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking. 4, each group should be autonomous except in matters affecting other groups or AA as a whole. 5, each group has but one primary purpose, to carry its message to the alcoholic who still suffers. 6, an AA group ought never endorse, finance, or lend the AA name to any related facility or outside enterprise, lest problem of money, property, or prestige divert us from our primary purpose. 7, every AA group ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contributions. 8, Alcoholics Anonymous should remain forever non-professional, but our service centers may employ special workers. 9, AA as such ought never be organized, but we may create service boards or committees directly responsible to those they serve. 10. Alcoholics Anonymous has no opinion on outside issues. Hence, the AA name ought never be drawn into public controversy. 11. Our public relation policy is based on attraction rather than promotion. We need always maintain personal anonymity at the level of press, radio, and film. And 12. Anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all our traditions, ever reminding us to place principles before personalities.
And Wes is going to come up and do the chips.
Hi everybody, my name's Wes Rogers. I'm a recovered alcoholic. Here at the 4th Dimension Group, we give out chips to celebrate times of recovery. Got a wonderful silver chip for anybody who wants to start this wonderful way of life. All right. That's Ryan. Anybody else? Red chip for 30 days. Gold chip for 90. That's Brad. Green for 6 months. We got 9 months. And we have poker chips for years, or multiples. All right. We have Linda with 8 and Mike with 13. Anybody else? All right.
Great job. Thanks, Wes. Good job, Wes.
Yeah, Tom. I guess. I hit the little red button, Joe. Okay? And now the moment we've all been waiting for, Miss Ruthie, all the way from St. Pete.
Thank you, Susan. My name is Ruthie Buxbaum, and I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date is April the 24th of 2006. My home group is the Blind Pass group in St. Pete Beach. And I am extremely grateful to have the night off of work. So, yay! I'm actually really grateful to be here. This is a special people up here. There's a lot of people in this room that knew me back when I was drinking. Or some of them knew me right when I came in. And for those of you who've been around for a while, you know how special it is when we get a chance to see those people that were at our first meetings, those people that helped us, give our lives to God so that we could come back, in my case, 6.5 years later, and report back about what my experience, strength, and hope has been since the day I showed up here. I am kind of like Eli. I spoke before with Eli, and I remember his first time he spoke at Fort DeSoto meeting, and I remember thinking, wow, that kid is going to help so many people. And I'm so excited that you're doing so well. It's just one of the great miracles in sobriety is watching people grow up and watching them stay sober and watching, life happen and go through things. When I started drinking, I was also about 14. That wasn't my first drink, though. My first drink was similar to yours. I think I was probably 7 or 8 years old, and my parents used to throw parties at our house. And we grew up in New Orleans, so my first drink was actually a Dixie beer. And I can remember drinking this Dixie beer and my mom finding out, and I thought it was cute, because I was jumping around the cocktail party. And she put me to bed, in her bed, which was the big tall bed, way up off the ground. And I can remember that was my first time to have the spins, too. I laid in bed and the whole room was moving. I don't know if there was actually a fan or not, but I remember thinking it was very cool. And I wasn't sure, what had caused all that, but the Dixie beer, I can report back, was the one. When I went off to boarding school, I was about 14 years old, and I look back at this time. It's so indicative of everything about me was true at 14. Had my first real drink. It was Jack Daniels. I drank it straight. It was hot. It was in a bottle. No Coke, no ice, no nothing. And there were some other people with me. Of course, they were boys, always boys. And I remember drinking and thinking that everything felt numb. My cheeks were hot. They felt kind of tingly and numb. And I can remember banging my head on this wall. Behind me, like at the dentist, you think, oh, wow, isn't that cool? I don't feel any pain. And I thought it was really cool to be hitting my head against this wall, not feeling any pain. And as I continued to drink, every time I started to feel pain or emotional discomfort, my good friend alcohol would take that away from me. And it's funny that's how it happened in the very beginning, is that it provided this beautiful buffer between the world of me in my head and the world out there of you. Is that there was something in between me and you that when I drank, I felt okay. I had the experience of, I didn't drink a lot back when I was a teenager. It was kind of maybe some binge drinking here or there. I did suffer very much, though, from alcoholism. That feeling Eli described earlier of not being good enough drove me. It drove me in everything that I did. It drove me in every relationship I was in. It drove me in school. I was an excellent student in school. I was, in many cases, number one. But I never felt number one. I never felt good enough. I remember I was that kid that would get straight A's, and I would go and do the extra credit so that I would be sure that I would be good enough. And no matter how well I did, it didn't solve what was wrong with me. Ever. Nothing ever would make that feeling go away. It didn't matter. It was funny. I remember getting a job at a bank in sobriety, and I was working up in Carrollwood. And the guy that was the manager of that bank was a football player where I went to high school. And he was talking about how popular I was in school. And I remember calling my sponsor at the time and I said, how weird is that? In my head, I was the misfit. In my mind, I was always on the outside of the in crowd. And yet to this guy who I thought was so popular, their impression of me was that I was one of them. And yet I never got a chance to feel it. I think a lot of us are that way. We never get a chance to enjoy our success. We never get a chance to enjoy our relationships. I don't know about any of you guys, but I was always in competition with somebody or something to try to be enough. My mom used to tell me, I actually reminded her of this last night. She used to say, I don't know what's wrong with you, Ruthie. There's not enough love, not enough attention, not enough anything that'll ever satisfy you. And I remember thinking, well, sure there is. I just need more of something. More money, more boys, better money, better something. Something was going to work. And the only time that I ever would settle down internally in my head was when I would be drinking. I had kids young. I never started drinking, when I was in my 30s, I started some pretty heavy drinking. And I have to say that I never intended to become what I became. When I started drinking and feeling better and feeling more self-esteem when I would get drunk, I'd feel like I was real cute, or I'd feel like I was real funny, or I'd feel like a lot of things. And instead, what actually became of me is that I became nothing. One day at a time, one drink at a time, I destroyed everything that meant anything to me. As a mother, I never sat out, to not show up to my daughter's cheerleading games. I never sought out with my oldest daughter to be missing her ACT exams. I never sought out with my mother to forget to call her on her birthday. I was so absorbed in myself that everything going on with me was so important. And things that were going on with the people I loved, somehow, they just didn't make the list. So as I drank, I felt much better. I could just let it all go. God would, grant me this serenity. Alcohol gave me that serenity, right? Alcohol took away all of that shame. I didn't mean for it to. It's not my intention. But it's actually what happened. Because I didn't understand it at the time. I have alcoholism. I personally believe I've always had alcoholism. I have had this spiritual malady that when you started adding alcohol and it would solve what was wrong with my head, then all of a sudden I'm captive to a physical disease. I believe I was captivated by a phenomenon of craving that once I started, I could not stop. Wouldn't stop. I never understood it about myself. It was one of my great secrets, was every once in a while I wouldn't black out. And I would be aware of how drunk I was. And I would be so drunk sometimes when I would come home that I kind of meandered. My last year, especially, I was in this townhouse, had a flight of stairs to go up, which is not a good thing in your last year of drinking. And I'd have to get up these stairs. And I'd kind of sometimes crawl, or I'd hold on to these banisters, It's kind of like weaving, like you're going to sail or ski or something, so I could go sideways. And I'd get up to the top and I'd be swerving and swaying. And I'm aware, I remember this one day so specifically, being so aware of how drunk I am. And I had to have one more drink before I went to bed. Why is that? What is wrong with me? I am sitting there trying to negotiate the top of my stairs with my kitchen counter. Like, okay, how many steps is it going to take for me to get there? This is not good. And, I feel sad today when I look back at that woman. I go and get another glass of wine, and I stumble over to the couch, and I'd be drinking, watching television, Law and Order, always Law and Order. Only alcoholics love Law and Order. I don't think anyone else watches that show. So I would sit there on this couch with this glass of wine, and I would pass out with it in my hand. And at some point, I would end up with it all over me, And this terrible thing would happen. A couple hours later, I'd suffered, I thought, from insomnia for about a decade. And what would happen is that my drunk would wear off, and I thought I was so tired. I really thought that was why I drank. I was so tired all the time. And so the only thing that I knew that could get me back to sleep was just a little more wine. And so I'd go in the kitchen. I had breakfast wine. It was a white Zinfandel. It's kind of sweet, I poured it in a different kind of glass. That way it was, it was different breakfast wine. And I try to drink myself back to sleep, And then the sad part about the story, is that I wasn't alone. I was not at home alone. I had children. I had middle schoolers. And, sometimes I would wake up while they were getting ready to just go to school by themselves, and while they were packing their own food and getting their own books together. And after a while, they'd just roll their eyes. Oh, geez, she's still drunk. And I would make a joke. Ha ha, oh, I can't really remember what happened last night. Ha ha, isn't it funny? And yet, at some level, I didn't feel the appropriate amount of shame. I didn't. I don't know why I didn't. I just laughed it off. And I think that must have been some kind of a survival skill. If I had really accepted what I had become, I couldn't have lived any longer. I tend to be a suicidal type thinker anyway. If I had truly been able to look in the mirror and see what I had become, it would never have been acceptable. So maybe that ability to laugh it off and to make a joke or to blame you or blame them or blame somebody kept me alive until I could land here. I ended up in a really crummy relationship at the very end. And this guy had a drug problem. And I was one of those really obnoxious alcoholics that didn't do drugs. Matter of fact, I looked down on those of you that did, because one of my traits as an alcoholic was that I surrounded myself always with people who were worse than me. I didn't mean to, it just kind of seemed to be a natural match. That way, if I'm better than you, I don't have to look at me. And I did it, in every aspect of my life, whether it was with men, whether it was with friendships, everybody. If I don't have to look at me because I'm busy telling you what you are doing wrong. And again, my great benefit is the fact that this somewhat of a jerk off ended up in my life, and he's, it's a long story, but the guy ended up taking all my money. I took him to treatment, and I guess he had been there for a couple of days before I even knew that he had taken all my money, so I was broke and didn't know it. And but I went to this treatment center. It was on the other side of the state. It's in Boynton Beach, and they started doing this intake. And during that intake, they were asking him all those questions that they ask us when we're new about his drinking patterns. And I'd never yet understand. I come from a long line of alcoholics in my family, but nobody had ever been sober. I've never even heard of sobriety. Matter of fact, the only people I ever knew that didn't drink were Mormons. And that was it. And I didn't know that many Mormons. So, it never occurred to me not to drink. At one time, I knew something was wrong with me. I have always known something was wrong with me. I have been to a lot of therapy. I mean, good Lord, thousands and thousands of dollars in therapy. And I remember one time, my oldest daughter, she had told me she thought maybe I was alcoholic or a drinking problem. I'm not sure the word she used, but it disturbed me because I had never considered it. And I was in therapy, of course, at the time. So, and I'm paying this woman in therapy. It's not like I have to go. So I'm telling her, well, my daughter thinks maybe I'm alcoholic. And with all the honesty that I had available to me at the time, I'm telling this woman about my drinking. And she said, well, it doesn't sound to me like you're alcoholic. It sounds to me like you're probably abusing alcohol. So I thought, well, that's good news. So I called up my daughter. She was in college. I said, hey, I went to therapy. And the woman said, I'm not alcoholic. Just so you know, I just abuse alcohol. And I can remember Kimmy said, what difference is it, Mom? I don't know. I kind of knew intuitively if I was alcoholic, I had to quit. But if I was abusing alcohol, I could just slow down a little bit. So, it seemed like good news to me to be abusing it. So, and that was, we talk about the capacity to be honest. That was my best capacity at the time. I couldn't have done any more. So, this is a kind of sad story too. It's about Kimmy, and she was going to college, and we had this little bar up in East Lake Woodlands, and I used to try to get her friends together on Saturday mornings, the ones that were going off to college, and I wanted to put on this class. I thought we should advertise it, called Buzz Management. And I was going to try to teach these off-going freshmen into college how to drink. Because you don't want to, not drink enough so that you don't get into the zone. And you don't want to drink too much so that where you're drunk. So I thought I could teach them how to maintain a buzz. I ended up in a blackout, but it seemed like a good idea at the time. I guess I probably was 3 or 4 years sober before I even remembered that. You might be an alcoholic if you need buzz management training. Tonight we were driving past the Varsity Club on the way up here from St. Pete, and she reminded me that was where my favorite bartender gave me her driver's license to give to Kimmy so she'd have a fake ID in college. This seemed like a good idea to me at the time, too. And, wanting to be even accepted by my own children. Right? It's not enough for me to just say, here, good luck in school. Right? I need to be the cool mom. I need to teach you how to drink. I need to give you all the tools necessary, like a fake ID. God, how sad today. I look at that and I think, oh my gosh. And that was the best I had to offer. And it wasn't good enough. It wasn't good enough. Sometimes I think back on some of that low self-esteem I had. It was very appropriate. Why would anybody feel good about themselves when they're living the way I was living? Can't. Doesn't work. Can't get granted self-esteem. You have to live it a little bit at a time. So, I I ended up in this treatment center. I was doing the intake, and they were asking this guy all these questions about his drinking, and I kept interrupting and telling them that he wasn't there for drinking, he was there for drugs. And that he also had a gambling problem. If they could solve that while he was there, that would be helpful. And they didn't laugh at me. That was good. And they thanked me for sharing, and kept going. So I left that treatment center in the middle of the night, and they had told me to go to an Al-Anon meeting, and I got lost and somehow meandered around and ended up on a Monday night at an Al-Anon meeting in Palm Harbor. And I've never quite figured this out, but between the time that I took that guy to treatment and several days later when I went to that Al-Anon meeting, I didn't drink. I couldn't even tell you that I know why I didn't drink or how I didn't drink or what happened. But I can tell you that for whatever reason it didn't happen. They had planted some seeds in my mind thinking. And all the way home, back in that trip from over on the other coast, I kept replaying it in my head. And went to that Al-Anon meeting, and there's this guy there. And after the meeting was over and I had opened my mouth, God, thank God for him, he pulled me aside and he said, Ruthie, you're in the wrong room. There's an AA meeting across the hall. And it starts in 15 minutes. And I would suggest you go to that meeting. And I don't know why I said okay, but I did. And I walked across the hall and I sat down, and you guys all knew each other. It was kind of like tonight. Everybody's happy and hugging. And the Al-Anon people were not that friendly, let me tell you. We looked like a much happier crowd, the alcoholics. So I maybe I'd fit into this group. And, oh my. I thought I'd never fit in. Everybody knew each other. I had no idea what was going on. I was trying really hard to listen to how it works when they were reading it. Because, when you haven't ever heard how it works, it's trying to figure out what the hell they're saying. It's like everybody's moving around and making noise. And they asked if there was anybody there for their first meeting. And I raised my hand. I didn't know not to. Now I might warn someone. Now if you raise your hand, here's what's going to happen. And so I raised my hand, and the guy up the front of the room said, "Are you here for your first ever meeting?" And I said, "Yeah." And someone else was like, "Ever, ever?" I was like, "Ever, ever." So they saved my life that night. They changed it from a Step 8 meeting, and they had a quick group conscience. They did a Step 1 meeting. And I had never heard of AA or Alcoholics Anonymous. I had a brother who had some trips in and out of AA, but I really had no concept what it was about. And at that meeting, everyone spent about the next hour describing what it felt like to be powerless over alcohol. And I started to think about those times when I was so drunk and still want another drink. And I heard people describe the phenomenon of craving. Oh man, did I get that. I heard other people talk about their lives and what it looked like when they got here, and that unmanageability. If you haven't heard these terms before, powerlessness, unmanageable, it didn't really make sense. But I heard your heart. I came from a world where when you met strangers, you told them how great you were. And I sat in a room of alcoholics, and y'all told me how terrible you had been. And I felt right at home. And actually what happened, it wasn't that I felt at home, it was that I trusted you. Nobody wanted anything from me. Just to be helpful. There was no dues to pay. I'd paid a lot of money in therapy. That $1 in the basket seemed like, wow, amazing. Nobody wanted me to buy them drinks or buy them dinner, and quite the opposite. They offered to take me out to dinner and to help buy me an ice cream. Those first few weeks I was so sick. I was so sick. And I had no idea. I didn't know I was alcoholic. I didn't say I was an alcoholic. A little bit of time went by. I kept going to meetings. These women surrounded me, and they said, we'll meet you tomorrow at this meeting. And until you decide whether or not you're alcoholic, do you think you can stay sober today? Old school AA, right? And I didn't know that was old school AA. I just said, yeah, I think I can. And they said, well, if you end up in trouble, here's our phone numbers. And what we do is until somebody decides whether or not they're one of us, it's usually easier to figure that out when you're not drinking. So you call one of us if you feel like drinking, and we'll kind of help you out a little bit until you decide. And I said, okay, I think I can do that. And I called a few people, crying, of course. And this one night, it was a little after midnight, I got a phone call. And it was from my youngest daughter's friend. And she was 14 at the time. And he said that she was down on the beach and was about to do some drugs. And he was too drunk to drive her home. And I woke up quick. And I started driving from Tampa all the way down to, I think she was in Madeira Beach. About halfway there, I was on Gulf Boulevard. And I think we all have a moment of clarity, or else we wouldn't be here today. And it hit me. Oh my God, I'm an alcoholic. Because I could not remember how many years it would have been that I could have answered that telephone. I would have been blacked out, or passed out, or too drunk to drive. I had a kid in danger. And I sat there, I started crying all the way there about how many of those calls had I missed. You know, what had happened to my life, my children, my commitments? What had I become? And I went to a meeting that night. And I raised my hand. It was a beach meeting. It was in Dunedin. And it was women. And I didn't know you. I didn't trust you. I didn't know anything about women. I only had relationships with men back in those days. And yet I went to that meeting and I raised my hand and I said, my name is Ruthie and I'm an alcoholic. And I remember crying and telling that story about what had happened on my way to the beach. And I found a sisterhood in this fellowship that has given me more richness in a human being's life than I could have ever possibly dreamed of. You guys loved me until I could have enough self-respect to become lovable. You know, you loved me when I wasn't worthy because you knew. You knew and you told me that if I did what you did, I could have what you have. And I was all in. You know, I seemed like a lot of problems happened my first year. You know? Oh, the wreckage starts to pile up the longer we're sober. And, you know, money problems and kid problems and, you know, oh my goodness, the wreckage that started to surface. You know, if you don't open the mail for a couple of years, it might be a problem. And, you know, it all came on me at once. And I don't know, you know, I've never quite been able to stand up here and tell you why it is that I was able to stay sober. You know, it was the grace of God. And, you know, for those of you that don't stay sober, I don't think that God's grace isn't there. I just could tell you that I honestly don't think I could have done it again. Staying sober for me, those first 30 days, wow, I have never done anything so difficult in my life, barring nothing. Nothing has ever been that hard, physically, emotionally. I was so delusional when I got here about everything that the longer I stayed sober, that's when I hit a bottom. I didn't get a bottom drinking. I got a bottom here. And, you know, Eli talked a little bit about old-timers. You know, I got surrounded by old-timers, and they took me to play golf, and they took me to ice cream after meetings, and these men saved my life, you know. The sisters in my home group and these old-timers, you know, wow, they just stayed with me. And I cried and I screamed and I knew everything and then I knew nothing and you know, it was impossible. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how to describe to you what those people did to me, but I can stand here and my life is unbelievably amazing today. And I can tell you that I am the product of a lot of really good 12-step work. I mean, I'm so grateful. I couldn't really find a sponsor who was good enough for me, so since I knew everything, and I had this image in my head of this woman that was going to be, you know, the goddess of AA for me, and so I decided to have Joe and Charlie as my personal sponsors on CD, and I had started to go, it's actually true, And so I started to go through all the step work because, I needed to go through the steps. I heard the message loud and clear that it was the steps that was going to make me better. And I knew I was going to die if I didn't go through the steps. And I was right. I knew I had to go through those steps because I wasn't going to make it. I was overwhelmed with trying to fight off suicide. Overwhelmed with guilt, overwhelmed with shame, overwhelmed with being completely lost. I had nothing inside of me. And so I couldn't really figure out how to do the 4-step. I couldn't figure out, I kept listening to it over and over again. I was on the internet trying to find worksheets. I called up a friend of mine who had been at my first meeting, and she said she would let me come up to her house, and she would help me figure out the columns. And so I took all these pieces of paper I had scrabbled all over the place, and I went up to her house. And hours and hours this woman sat with me. And her kids were running around going nuts at the time. I didn't care, I wanted what she had. I wanted what she had. And I would do anything for help. And before the end of that day, I had gotten all the worst stuff out in my 4-step. And I had done all the hardest part of my 5th step. And by the time I left there, I had a sponsor, a real AA sponsor. And I felt like I was going to make it. I had hope. Nothing like getting into your 4th and 5th step and getting that stuff off of you to let you know that everything's going to be okay. Life goes on. It's all going to work out. And I could look up. I'm going to go back to that day that I drove down to the beach and collected my daughter, because that was one of the first times I was able to show up for my kids. And I think that one of the great gifts of my sobriety has been that I've been able to show up ever since then. I do a much better job today of being a mom. And, my mother and I had a talk a couple of days ago about this, and she was talking about all her regrets that she had being my mom. And I said, yeah, but you know what, Mom? My memories really began when I became a mom. My relationship with my mother really has meant more to me as an adult than it did when I was a little girl. And, what my life is like today, I am so lucky. I can tell you today, I want what I have. I have a good. And I can look in the mirror and I can look at the things I do right and I look at the things that I do wrong, and I feel like I am okay just the way I am. I am firmly planted in Alcoholics Anonymous. I have a sponsor. I sponsor others. I'm active in meetings. I have a beautiful business. I have active relationships with my family. All I ever wanted was to have what I have today. It's not stuff. It's not the business. To have my self-respect, to have my family around me, to be involved with others. You know what? I was talking to Dan before the meeting tonight. I was telling him about this shyster that screwed me with this internet deal and blah, blah, problem. And he said to me, one of the truest things I've heard in a while, he said, "You've got high-class problems, girlfriend." And isn't that the truth? Right? I have great problems. But my biggest struggles today are because I'm spread so thin. What a blessing, right? That people want me in their lives. My daughters want me. My mother misses me. My son needs me. That wasn't true 6.5, 7 years ago. I was a joke. I was. That young daughter that I went to go collect, she's getting married on Sunday to a wonderful guy. That older daughter that I gave the fake ID to, she's getting married next year to a wonderful guy. My mother has believed in me no matter what I had become. And these 3 people are here today. They've never never seen my talk. They've never been to AA meeting. Molly's been to some meetings with me, but wow, like I get to share this with my family. Really? Me? Where I came from? What I did? This is a good way of life. I couldn't possibly have any more than I have today. And what I did to get here was follow you. I did these steps. I continue to do these steps. I continue to answer service calls. I continue to do 12-step work. I turn my life over to God. He has blessed me so far past what I deserve. Mercy is probably one of the most meaningful words in my life. What do they say? That is undeserved blessings. I could never repay the rebirth I've been given in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I am eternally grateful. And thank you very much for the opportunity to share this tonight.